Welcome to this rare interview with two legendary anthropologists, the late Francis Huxley and Jeremy Narby, hosted by Neil Harvey, Bioneers Radio host and consulting producer. We hope you enjoy it. We join the conversation as it begins. There is a particular sensitivity in the United States, I would say, regarding use of psychoactive plants. It's almost a puritanical fear. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the history of humans' interest in pursuing altered states. And I'm particularly interested, why is it in this culture that we seem phobic?
Well, Gordon Wasson, when he married a Russian wife, he was the author of that
Life magazine article
about psilocybes, which ruined the career of Maria Sabina, the mushroom taker of the little ones. And he was mentioning that in around the world there are cultures which think that every mushroom poisons you just by looking at it, and others who make a great search to find the ones to eat which are delectable. And that he was one of those who thought just the sight of one would poison him for the next 2 days, and his wife, being Russian, was scouring the woods and coming back with baskets full of bolitas and agarics and all kinds of things which no decent Western citizen should even think of.
So that he was a fungophobe and he'd married a fungophile.
Yeah, and then he became fungophile. So I think that the West is pretty well fungophile all around the vegetable spectrum.
And if more Americans married Russians, things might improve, according to that view.
Yes, or Shibibos or something of the kind, because they know even more than Russians.
So why are Anglo-Saxon types fungophobic?
Well, I'm not. I like going out into the woods, and actually I think a lot of Anglo-Saxons who go mushrooming, but I think that's only about 100 years old, that particular way of looking at funguses and thinking about them.
The Italians and Germans in Europe anyway, and the Swiss, the Spaniards, the French are all mushroom enthusiasts.
Yes, I would think it's possibly due to Oliver Cromwell. You know, anyone who can kill a king can kill mushrooms by the millions. I've noticed actually that in England and in this country, people looking at mushrooms kill them with sticks as much as they can. They stamp on them. Very strange. It's like snakes, you know. Snakes are always deemed to be the horrors of the universe, and so you kill them if you can.
The other funny thing is that one could think that the white man has a problem with the natives' psychoactive plants. But tobacco is the number one shamanic plant in the Americas. And white man took it up with great ease in Virginia and Jamestown and these places, and brought it back to Europe, and was a very successful substance. And Europeans didn't know; they didn't even have a verb for to smoke. The first Europeans who observed this behavior called it to drink smoke. The natives drink the smoke because they didn't even have a verb for it. So it's a recently picked up behavior, but it's true that what they did to the tobacco was make it less intoxicating, less strong, less nicotine. They kind of watered it down and turned it into Virginia tobacco, which contains 18 times less nicotine than the Nicotiana rustica, and then turned it into an industrial product and added all kinds of chemicals to it and made it the number one agent of death in the Western world. So there does seem to be some kind of dis-ease there, but just what it is. Do you have any clues on that?
It's all too complicated. It's all much too complicated. I mean, it's not as though we don't drink vegetable intoxicants in the form of beer and grain spirits and all the rest of it. Aldous Huxley thought that every civilization has its very particular own intoxicant or mind changer. The West has always gone with alcohol, spruce beer, barley beer, the whiskey, the water of life, the whiskey, and wines. And Greek wine was a real mixture, but it wasn't just, they put resin in it for one, and they put in every conceivable hallucinogenic plant they could think of. I mean, poppy and I don't know about, I mean, I couldn't make you the list, but they had about 18 different herbs they would put into a wine, and that's why they always cut it half and half with water, because taken by itself it was bad news, and people did go nuts. So, but since then we've lost the Greek habit of putting anything more than hops in our beer. Hops is very nice, it makes you feel sleepy.
There's something to say about ayahuasca, which is that in its indigenous context in the Western Amazon, it's clear that it's a power tool and that it is not without risks, and that people who become involved with it gain vision, knowledge, and power, which is easily abused and which is certainly double-edged. Ayahuasquero shamans are people the community wants to keep an eye on. This is not just about healing. It's never just about healing. It always has a dark side to it, and it's not for everybody. Well, the way that the Western world seems to have gotten a hold of ayahuasca, and I'm talking about the enthusiasts at this point, is the idea that, oh, well, it contains an ingredient that is produced by the human brain, so it's neurocompatible. It comes from a plant. It comes from the rainforest Indians. It's true that it's the concord of hallucinogens. So it's also true that it's very user-friendly compared to some of these synthetic drugs, which can be, frankly, neurotoxic. But it is not true that it's innocuous. And there are people who drink it and who get into very deep water and who have their worldviews changed, whereas they didn't think, they weren't even looking for that. And they come out of it disturbed and changed. And anyhow, half the experience is who administers it and in what circumstances and how the brew itself is prepared. And none of these basic public safety questions, which should concern us, I think, we friends of healing the rainforest, indigenous people, respect of their knowledge and so on. It's just basic ABCs about ayahuasca, which I don't see many Western ayahuasca enthusiasts giving any time of day to. And so what this does is it opens up a whole side that can be criticized by the enemies of drugs. And they say, this is crazy. This is a powerful hallucinogen. You can't just give it out to any old buddy in any circumstances. And they're right. And so if there was more self-criticism in the ayahuasca-using community and more above-the-board, discussion of these problems and bringing out front, we should not be afraid of giving fuel to the enemies of drugs by putting on the table the cases of people who have been changed by it and who have had difficulties with it. And because it's so polarized, especially in this country, the war on drugs, those who are friends of ayahuasca often know of problems, but dare not speak because they don't want to be seen as encouraging the other side. And that's simply crazy, because this is a powerful drug, and what indigenous societies indicate is that you've got to learn how to use it. You have to be aware of the dark side of the double-edged tool. Otherwise, you're going to get into trouble and cause trouble. So I think it would be good if one could have more discussions about this without paranoia and with only an affection for the truth of things.
There are a lot of people whose antecedents I know nothing about coursing around in this country that I heard of in the last 6 months. And what they bring and what they say is ayahuasca. I don't know what's in those bottles. I don't know at all. I don't know if it's when it was brewed, if it's now fermenting and producing things it shouldn't, and whether it's actually made out of the regulation plants. Is it laced with datura juices, which give you the first buzz of intimation that you're going somewhere, but end up by making you feel pretty nasty if it's in quantity, very off your head and sideways. Or I don't know what you do about this. Should the Brazilian government sort of have a ayahuasca bureau in which every single bottle exported has the government's stamp of approval?
Well, some kind of regulation.
It should be some kind of regulation, but how, when this just comes in an old Brazilian beer bottle,
well,
how do you know what's in it?
I welcome the French wine critique or French restaurant critique mode, where you have outside people who come in and they go the rounds and they visit the different people who propose the vine extract and criticize them openly and give them points and keep an eye on them. That is what traditionally the role of the community is for a shaman, is to there is no shaman without a community. In the definition of what a shaman does, it's a person who, by profession and in the name of the community, communicates with the spirits of nature. And the community's role is to keep an eye on that person. And so now we live in a world where a community has changed into this global, multifaceted, pluri-individualistic scene where everybody's doing whatever they want. We need some culinary critiques to come around and make things a bit more safe for people. Because if there's a restaurant that's dishing out unhealthy food, people should know about it.
It seems to me some of what you're talking about is the relationship, the lack of relationships with the plant, with the source material. Even cigarettes, you're actually dealing with white cylinders that you light up and you ingest, and people are not associated with the plant really, and it's that disassociation. The culture is so disassociated with where these things come from, and so there's no culture around it.
It must be nice to be in a Shipibo community where you go visit your shaman, and first thing in the morning, there he is with all his children and his wife or wives and relatives, and there's a big pot bubbling over, and they look after it all day long, and you just sit around watching this process, realizing that your vibrations are all being boiled in with this. And he's obviously taken great care to make the whole thing a very good brew. And if he's a good cook, but how does one know offhand? Yes, there should be. I think it'll take about 50 years before there are enough ayahuasca inspectors with a good nose, you know. But this seems to be the 98 vintage, yes.
The Pucallpa 98.
Yes.
Well, I would submit that Pucallpa is the Bordeaux of the ayahuasca leagues, but
Oh, yeah.
meanwhile, it's true, I think, that if one is going to be involved with psychoactive plants, the idea of knowing the plants one ingests by, for example, cultivating them works with certain plants because they're relatively easy to use. Tobacco or hemp or and even psilocybin mushrooms can be picked if you live in certain areas and can be used with prudence, and you can figure out you don't really need a guide if you're a grown-up and you know how to read a few books. Though, of course, one always wants to be careful with these substances, even if they seem to be relatively light. But something like ayahuasca, in my view, is deep water, and even if I knew how to brew it, I wouldn't want to take it without a maestro who really knows how to administer it. And usually knowing how to administer it and sing along with it also involves knowing how to brew it, because brewing it is an art which involves singing on the brew and spending hours with it. So I think then if you're really interested in ayahuasca, it seems to me that the best way to go about it is to go on a quest and take enough time and go to ayahuasca territory and ask around and who's a good maestro, and ask to see how the maestro prepares the brew, and actually take it seriously enough. If you're really interested in French wine, well, go to Bordeaux and hang out and see how it's done. Go at harvest time and understand what you're drinking.
When you say administer, that also means seeing people in the various throes of the experience and knowing how to take them out of one bad place.
Well, it's the whole...
The whole episode.
Because actually we have a rather poor view as to what this could be about, but it involves preparing the body through diets, firstly, and then showing up at sessions. And these sessions use perfumes, for example. There's a whole impact of smell on modified consciousness, or the sound of human voice, just singing and submitting yourself to sitting in the dark for hours and listening. I think it's something that one needs to prepare for.
What evidence do we have for the benefits to community that individuals are having these experiences, that they're partaking in these experiences?
What kind of benefits do you have in mind?
Well, does it enhance the community? Does it make it thrive? Does it make people render the community a more cohesive, loving, creative, happy community? I think of Western culture and limited experience of people who, in college, get wasted on this and wasted on that, and I don't see much positive coming out of that. There might be 1 in 1,000 or something who has some sort of glimmer of awakening of some kind that maybe moves them in what I would call a positive direction, something that's more benevolent. But a lot of times it's kind of self-indulgent, blow your mind because you're better else.
What's your observations on that?
Well, I think it depends on the places, the societies, and the time. There are certainly examples among the Jivaro, for example, of societies where 75% of the men use ayahuasca, and it fuels paranoia, violence, sorcery, and all kinds of negative things. And these men are almost permanently under the influence of strong hallucinogens, and they've got shotguns, and they're going at each other's throats. And it's just obvious if you have a society like that and you spike it with strong hallucinogenic plants, it's not going to get any better. Surprise, surprise. So these are double-edged tools, once again. And they can be used for healing and enlightenment and creating group mind, for example. Traditionally, I think that way out in the forest, if you're a hunting, gathering community, to get the hunters, for example, into group mind and working together and listening to the forest and knowing where the animals are going to be, it can be a useful tool, which also goes to show that it can be used for mind manipulation, which is why one wants to worry about it when religious groups get a hold of it and so on. You really can influence other people's psyches, and you can use it to get people out of depression, but you can also use it to put them into depression. So I think you can find the whole gamut of what you can do with these things.
Yes, I heard of a band of fundamental Christians down in the south of New Mexico who were taking LSD once a week or so. That was 20 years ago. And they were getting very unpleasant in their dealings with their own members, accusing each other of witchcraft and exorcising them forcibly and making them do things they shouldn't have done. But isn't that life? No one always thought that taking mescaline or LSD would clear out the last remnants of ill will, hatred, and ambition, and egotism, but it's not really like that just by itself. And ayahuasca does seem to be the most complicated of all the ones that we know of at the moment.
Well, I think if there's a simple description of it, it's that it's an amplifier, and so it amplifies what's already there. And if somebody is an ego-powered, power-hungry type and starts guzzling ayahuasca, I think it is quite possible that it would just make it worse.
Yeah.
We're here at the Bioneers Conference, and it's an ecological conference working toward restoration of natural systems and recreating communities and culture, earth-centered culture. And talk about how this conversation relates to that, to environmental activism and such.
Well, centrally, what shamans have been involved with, as they put it themselves, is communicating with the spirits of nature in different ways, and going so far as to turn into jaguars in their minds, identifying with animals, considering plants to be teachers. No kidding. Not kidding, actually considering plants to be teachers and ingesting them, and then in their minds seeing information and learning from the plant and having an I-thou relationship with the plant's spirit, and talking with landscape and with entities like the owner of animals about to what extent when the human community can use animals for meat, just for starters. So it's about negotiating with the rest of nature for human use of nature. Well, surely that's central to what interests Bioneers.
And it also does, they're also of prime importance in sorting out the bad manners of their own people, of their own group. By bad manners, I mean breaking the rules, especially when they're rules of taboo rules, and getting rid of ill will between people, healing those who have succumbed to ill will or whatever it is. I mean, they have to, with epidemic disorders, it does become rather a difficulty for them. But on the small scale, the ill will does produce an enormous variety of bodily disorders, of illnesses, and that's also one of their prime functions. So if you had... And then, of course, there's news from nowhere or from over the border, which is always very interesting to listen to. So they have 3 or 4 sort of major functions, and I quite agree if Bioneers actually owned a forest estate where they could boil down redwoods or something and take an intoxicating draught and have a community to look after and to keep in order, it would be a most interesting experiment, because a shaman is a man of really, or he should be a man of enlarged faculties and capacities. And he can do things that other people just cannot, like a court jester who can afford to speak the truth because, he's only an asshole. And a shaman is not only an asshole, but he's a god's eye, so it's all very complicated. You can't get around shamans at all easily.
I mean, we talk about activism, their front is long, and there are all sorts of different kinds of activism. People can make quilts as part of their activism, or teach their children in a way that's activism, but there's also you could say the inner activist or the shaman activist. Is that what you're talking about, kind of?
Yes, well, that takes quite an education. You were asking me earlier this year, when does the shaman really mature? 20, 30, 40, 50? we thought about 45, didn't we? He's sort of 50. He's sort of still learning as he goes, if he's any good. You know, it's just like any profession amongst doctors. I had a wonderful family doctor found by my mother, and I remember when he came round just for a cup of tea. He happened to be in the district, and he popped around to say hello. We were friends, and he opened the door and stood there for a moment looking at my mother and said, "You've got amoebic dysentery." And so she had. That's a doctor who can diagnose at 20 paces. Oh, was I impressed by him. Instead of doctors around where I come from now in New Mexico who said, "Oh, well, yes, your blood count's down. We shall have to take every kind of test. It'll cost you $3,000, and we may not be able to tell you the answer in the end." That's the other kind of doctor. And even where they have no such technical devices, you always find, for one really good doctor or shaman, there are 4 or 5 alpha minus shamans, who they're good. I mean, they're better than seeing a beta plus who just and then all the ones in the bottom row, charlatans galore, sort of doling out futile advice and telling you to go to 11-step programs to get your 12th or something. So there are very few really good shamans in the world. Yeah. And even with them, you never quite know whether what they're about to do to you. Can you really trust them? Some of them you can't trust.
Are they serious?
Yes, they're really serious, because if you might find they're doing something. Well, as every shaman I know and people in that league, they say, well, we can't operate with the world as it is without using our left hand as well as our right. The right hand is doing good, and the left hand is having to do ungood, do bad to certain people, to take their bad away from them and convert it to something better. Sometimes they get a little egotistic and start doing bad because it's more fun than doing good. So the whole thing is
ambiguous brokers.
Yes. But aren't we all? I mean, when you're in this world and you meet a lawyer, you never know just how he's going to run with your case.
Lawyers are ambiguous brokers.
Oh, man. Or politicians, for that matter.
Or anthropologists.
Or anthropologists.
Journalists.
We're only human. We have to realize we're only human, and we make every kind of disastrous mistake and marvelous triumph. And hovering between these two extremities, there are people who have a gift for doing the best as often as possible, and others who just do it routine or to earn an unsavory living. So really, when you talk about shamans, it's no other than talking about poets or journalists or politicians or anyone else. There are some you can trust and admire, and others you shouldn't be seen dead with. Or if you are seen dead with, it's hard luck. And as for these drugs, well, they try, as Jeremy was saying, they charge you up according to your will and the curious shadows that lurk in the joints of your bones. It's dreadful to think there's no easy way of achieving enlightenment.
No, don't tell me that. No, it's all supposed to be goodness and light, isn't it? The path to enlightenment.
No, monsieur. My experience has been that knowledge is something one gains with difficulty. And easy knowledge is almost a contradiction in terms. Not quite, because sometimes it does kind of fall out of the sky when you're not expecting it and onto your head.
You can't quite believe it then, can you?
Yes.
It's too good to be true. Like falling in love. Oh.
So It's uphill most of the time with
Yeah.
the odd meteorite, the path to knowledge. And I think it's true on the science side of things and on the shaman side of things. And just on the human trying to get through the day side of things.
I guess why? Why should it be hard?
Well, I think no one can actually come up with an answer that everybody will agree with, but there are several interpretations that are possible, one of which is that in as much as there's an intelligence in nature, it might be in its interest to make knowledge something that one has to work at getting, like a safety mechanism. You can't just any old buddy have it. You have to deserve it, because once you have it, it is power, and you can change things. And you want those who have it to be aware of what they can do with it so as not to abuse it. So knowledge really is a tool in the world and a fountain of power and potential. So it has to be somewhat difficult.
But I think this particular brand is difficult because outside of the exact sciences, everything worth saying has to be said by indirection.
Metaphor.
Metaphor. Yosto. And you can't get over that. You can't speak directly about anything without it immediately losing its nature and becoming something else. It's most interesting.
Because the essence of things is ambiguous, precisely.
Well, it's
so
all, yes.
If you name it down to a single side, you're already misnaming it. So it's always like and not like. So the indirect naming or metaphor is the only correct way of naming it.
I think that's the crucial difficulty in the end, is how you become knowledgeable in yourself of the things you have knowledge of or you've learned. How do you compose them into something that can walk about on two legs and do things spontaneously out of the blue, extempore, you might say. That's quite an art. I mean, when one sees beginners in psychoanalysis, for instance, man, they're half out of their heads with lust for labeling other people with all the disorders that they suffer from themselves. And they can only see because someone's doing it outside.
Yes.
So, I mean, we're just made that way. I think that's the reason. And it takes a lot to learn things about the other world, this world, outside us, so that it collaborates with ourselves. The intelligence of nature seems to be rather different, however, because it seems to be mutual.
Well, we are products of nature, and we are somewhat intelligent. And so we are intelligences inside nature, looking at nature and seeing if we can see intelligence. So we're also looking at ourselves, and we are also nature looking at itself through us. So
And in us, I would hope.
Probably.
That's my take. I think
So it's mirrors all the way down into ourselves and back up and out through our eyeballs and colliding head-on with the world that we see.
Oh,
And it's
mirrors. It's not mirrors. It can't be mirrors made of glass. How awful. You know, it really makes one feel entirely schizoid to be made of mirrors.
Well, there is
I would
something
like to be made out of a kind of sentient Polaroid, I think.
If you look at an amoeba,
Yeah.
or a slime mold, a slimy cell in a maze capable of computing the solution, the shortest path, but without a brain. There's just this cell there, but it's smart enough to know which is the shortest road. Probably smarter than I am. I'm not very good in mazes. The slime mold seems almost smarter than I am in that situation. So I look at it with my human brain, and I see its slimy intelligence. We do look back at each other in a kind of a distorted mirror scene where we don't really recognize each other. I have a hard time wrapping my mind around what amoeba intelligence might consist of, and I have the impression that it's mutual. And so far, I've been trying to understand the intelligence in nature by poring over it from all angles for the last 18 months, and I can't say that I'm much more advanced in feeling that I can name it. I've been looking at it and sniffing it and thinking about it and writing about it, but finally it's something that is almost unnameable. And I think for that reason, because it's difficult to separate my own mind from it. It's like it's difficult to do brain surgery on yourself. But I'm working on it. Do you have any advice?
Oh, yes, go native. It's like the Taoist advice for doing Chinese landscape painting. You go and walk around a mountain and you find a place to sit, and you just sit there all day, and then you go and have supper, and then you come back next morning and the weather's changed a bit, and you sit and you look at everything over and over again. You do this for about 5 weeks. Then you go home and you paint the mountain because it's now infused in your sensibility. That's what I mean by going native.
Did I tell you I met this French scientist who told me that crocodiles didn't dream, and he'd run different animals into these brainwave machines and found no REM activity in crocodiles. And I had a hard time believing it. What do you think?
I heard this news the other way around just last week, that crocodiles do dream. You have little REM blips. So is this a piece of urban mythology gone wrong?
Perhaps. I think we need to look into this. And, because swimming with ducks is one thing. Hanging out with crocodiles and finding whether they dream or not is another one.
Your investigations into intelligence, animal intelligence, plant intelligence, and you're describing this series of mirrors, just mirrors going back and everywhere. And it makes me think of, and I associate this with Buddhist meditation, Dzogchen or something, where the meditator then comes to a point of stillness and asks the question, well, who's really meditating here? And pops that question and then plumbs for an answer, not very rigorously, just kind of opens to an answer of who's there. And people report back, you find you drop back to a place of non-duality, a place where who's asking the question? Well, really nobody's asking the question. There's nothing there. And how does that relate to the mirrors and?
Well, I think it's also important to get away from a too ego-centered approach. We are somewhat locked into our skulls. That's our fate for the moment. But nevertheless, the whole point is that there are other skulls, other beings. Some beings don't even have skulls. And they all seem to be made of cells just like me, that have DNA and proteins just like me, use the same signaling pathways, so on. And we do seem to be cousins all the way down to the invertebrate worms and the unicellular and the bacteria. In fact, we carry billions of bacteria around inside us, and if we didn't, we'd be dead, and so on. Just what is. But we talk. Here we are, talking into microphones, and giraffes and bananas don't, though we share many genes. So what am I to think of them? If I'm just a materialist, it's pretty obvious how kin-related they are. On a physico-chemical level, we're the same stuff. But mind-wise, empathy-wise, intelligence-wise, there is an otherness in nature. It doesn't talk back at us in English, in American English even. So we're stuck for interviewing amoebas, for example. It's a bit rough, and I wouldn't want to claim to be a spokesperson for the invertebrate world, for example. And in fact, insect mind is a rather alien kind of setup. I wouldn't want to be an ant. Thank you very much.
Or a praying mantis.
I'd rather be a free-roaming enzyme. You know, I mean, sure, just a little
That's a very
cell
good name for you.
in a body, you know, and go around to trouble spots and gauge them by myself. And if it needs some accelerating some reactions, putting some energy in, and as soon as it's done, head off somewhere else in my patrol car, you know. Sort of biospheric free agent enzyme Narby reporting. But an ant, no thanks. You know, it has a kind of alien, militaristic kind of...
Sexless life.
Yeah.
Sounds just like Los Alamos.
Well, you see, I think it's pretty clear that humanity is in kindergarten when it comes to understanding nature, understanding itself. You know, the basic questions of who we are, where do we come from, what are we doing here, and where are we going, you know, haven't changed. No one knows, really. There's so much mystery, it's not funny, and the more just science discovers, the more mysterious it gets. And yes, probably trying to think out the kinship we have with nature, for example, by blending the best of science with the best of indigenous knowledge, one can start to open up some kind of common ground of understanding from which to ask questions. And I think this teaches a kind of agnosticism or openness to mystery, and certainly the desire to run away from certitudes and to just start trying to see the limitations of the categories that got us here. You know, I mean, rationalism was pretty good rocket fuel, but it's smelling a bit old. You know, and the old dogma that science had the cornerstone of the scientific method, according to Jacques Monod, who said this in 1970, is the idea that nature is objective and that natural beings are to be considered as objects without intention. Well, there are just too many ants who cultivate mushroom gardens with antibiotics, or bees who handle abstract concepts, or crows who use tools with standardized hooks, or dolphins who recognize themselves in mirrors, or parrots that say what they mean, for this to be of any use now.
No, that was the golden age of science.
Chance and necessity.
Yeah.
Über alles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A very fine book. But he did bring in the poetics of the situation by the back door without even an introduction. Suddenly he said, of course, this means. That's what the kinds of things you're thinking about. Just open this little door and they will come in there without introduction or explanation, but they're all part of it.
Well, and he said about bees, they may seem to act with purpose, but we now know with certitude that their behavior is purely automatic.
What is the difference, I wonder?
Automatic bees.
So after the rational, where are we heading, or where do we want to go? Back to mind-altering and...
Well, considering that, I wonder how much of our life is made out of a sense of either accomplished or disappointed mutuality with the rest of the world. And we have this thing which is always looking to be part of something, to be completed by something else, and then to move on and find more completions everywhere. When one enters then into a wholehearted mutual relationship, the amount of knowledge that comes to one is quite staggering, because it seems to be all part of oneself, though it comes from over there, maybe. So I think it may be just dropping this word consciousness, which I think is being misused and has had its innings, thinking in using another vocabulary to get hold of what it is we're missing. I think our vocabulary at this moment and the terms we use stop us from actually imagining any other way of doing it than the way we are. So how we start a new poetic, which is also exact, I think is the crux of the matter, just as, the whole history of anthropology goes from anthropologists going off and seeing savages doing things that they wouldn't do in their right minds ever, and then after 200 years they come back again and they say, well, actually that sounds like rather fun to do, and then some of them do turn native. I've heard of 2 or 3 anthropologists turning native, and suddenly they're doing what they had always wanted to do, and anthropology was the way they got financed in order to find somebody who would do just what they wanted to learn about. Meanwhile, this other way of knowing about things, which is not the terminology, well, it's another terminology, it's another reasonableness with other terms. I think this must be, in the end, the aim for any new attempt at solving your question.
Yes, and I think that moving beyond rationalism involves firstly realizing that rationalism set itself up as the only legitimate way of knowing. Moving beyond it consists of looking for a common ground for human knowledge, which would accommodate several ways of knowing and allow them to be compared and used together. And I think that a common ground for human knowledge would reconcile control and respect, microscopes and modified consciousness, scientific texts and oral expertise, detachment and emotion, matter and spirit, among others. But it's not going to be easy to set it up. I think that learning to work with other systems of knowledge is like learning another language. And so bicognitivism is like bilingualism. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of work, but ultimately rewarding. And what you get is another way of looking at the world. So beyond rationalism lies plurilingualism, multifaceted, combining differences and synthesizing them into something better, more complex, like a Swiss Army knife.
Oh, and there's one thing which I'm sure that we should think about sometime, is that our dependence on reading a text with our eyes, and it's all in the alphabet, stops us from actually hearing what other people say. I had a terrible experience after my first bout of field work. I got away from the place and I started reading my journals, and I threw them away. They were so awful. It was very uncomfortable for me having to write in a notebook in a hammock with a piece of pencil, and I used to get writer's cramp, I remember. And so I only got the meaning down, but not the words in which the meaning was told me. And I thought, I've actually never remembered the words in which meanings are told. And so I trained myself for the next 6 months to listen to the words and not bother about the meaning, because I could always find the meaning in the words, but I can't find the words in the meaning. And I think anyone who's been overeducated with textbooks should take 5 years off and just use his ears to remember with and not his eyes. It makes the shift in one's awareness is very considerable.
Well, shall we go for that beer?
Shall we go for that beer? That's what I call a piece of oral tradition.
Yeah. Thank you both for this time. Really appreciate it.